One thing I really enjoy about the Super Smash Bros. Franchise is how many people are introduced to lost characters in games from the past. Like in Super Smash Bros. 4, they introduced this character called Pac-Man. Like, who the hell is that? But other than Ness, Captain Falcon, and Shulk, one character really stood out to me over the years.
Yeah, it's that Cupid guy that you spam B with from across the stage.
Don't give away my battle secrets. So, this week is all about Pit, Kid Icarus himself. We'll be going over his development lore and legacy. Get ready for Hero Unlocked. So what kind of name is Pit exactly? Well, the Western name that we have is a slightly shorter version of the character's Japanese name. In the East, he is called Pito, which is, once again, a shorter version of the Japanese word for Cupid, Kyopito. Huh, I guess that kinda makes sense. While designed by Nintendo, Kid Icarus was programmed by Intelligent Systems. This group would later gain notoriety as the developers of the Advance Wars games as well as the Fire Emblem series. This game originally operated under the name Myth of Light, the Mirror of Palutena, and this may have been because of the several plot points that occur within the game as well as the mythology that it's based on, but we'll get to that a little later. The story itself was written by Toru Osawa. Osawa also did pixel artwork and other general design choices, but whom do we credit for that fire track that graces the underworld within the first game? Well, that masterful track was composed by Hirokazu Tanaka. I mean, just listen to it. If you've played the title, you know that it has some pretty far-fetched aspects to its design, even when considering the game it's based on. The game's director, Satoru Okada, initially intended for the game to be a bit more serious in nature, but after some pushback from his colleagues, the more humorous elements were added. This includes things like the eggplant wizard and a sentient nose. Unfortunately though, the developers of the game worked extreme hours in order to get the game out in time for its December release in 1986. This meant that certain things like stage ideas didn't have time to be put into the final build. The North American and European releases that came the next year saw their way onto the NES as opposed to the floppy disk format that Japan saw. What did this mean for the West? It meant that we didn't get on-disk saves. We were only offered a password system. So how did they make that up to us? Well, the next game in the series, titled Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters, released in 1991 on the Nintendo Game Boy. It was a very rare first-party title that didn't see its way to Japan first. This one actually saw a better reception than its predecessor. This could be due in part to the fact that it wasn't as difficult as the first title. What more can be said? It was Kid Icarus on the Game Boy. It obviously didn't light the world on fire though, as it was 2 decades before we saw another title from the franchise. In 2012, Kid Icarus Uprising made its way onto the Nintendo 3DS. It was put together by Project Sora and Sora Limited. The reason why these don't sound familiar is because this was the first and last title by Project Sora, as it was shut down shortly after the release of Uprising. Sora, its parent company, still has a hand in the development of the Super Smash Bros. Games. Shortly after the release of Super Smash Bros. Brawl, the late Satoru Iwata sat down with Sakurai and asked him to make a title for the upcoming 3DS system. Sakurai had decided on a third-person shooter. While it may not have been a ripe genre for the folks in the East, it was still an undertaking that he wanted to be part of. He then looked over several franchises from the characters in Brawl that had not seen the light of release in some time, and he decided to use Kid Icarus partially because of its popularity in the West. Sakurai put together a script for the game as he wanted his dev team to be able to focus on the gameplay. He also wanted to make sure the game's lore didn't go the route of God of War, whatever that means. There were some unfortunate design choices that came with being so early in the life of the 3DS. Things like aiming to use as much of the console's power as possible. This made it so that utilizing things like the Circle Pad Pro weren't feasible. If you're left-handed, you'll understand why this is a pretty big deal. Upon release, the game fared much better critically. Honestly, I believe this was a combination of things, like the fact that we didn't have a Kid Icarus game in so long, and that it was a great way to show off the 3DS's capabilities.
Okay, the development is cool and all, but what about the lore?
The plot of Kid Icarus is actually quite interesting, and you wouldn't know it from the gameplay, like, at all. You see, Kid Icarus is based on many things, but none more than Greco-Roman mythology. It can be said that Pit's story echoes that of Icarus, yes, but I mean, other than the wings, no. Like, not really, so throw that all out. I don't even think Pit's character is like Icarus either. I've read that the franchise takes more inspiration from the stories of Perseus and Eros. Perseus being a man on a quest to slay Medusa, a quest that he was sent on by the goddess Athena, whom I and many people think Palutena is based on. Moreover, Eros is the Grecian version of Cupid, hence hearts being the coins in the game. Now, in the first game's official manual, the Tale of Kid Icarus tells us the plot that took place before the events of the game. The tale tells us of a place called Angel Land that was ruled by both Palutena and Medusa. The two operated in duality. Palutena provided light and helped man grow crops. Medusa, on the other hand, presided over the darkness, and through her disdain for man, she destroyed crops and even went as far as to turn the citizens of Angel Land into stone. Palutena, in all her wisdom, turned Medusa into a monster out of vengeance for man and sent her to the underworld. This act enraged Medusa, obviously, who teamed up with the monsters of the underworld and led an attack on Palutena's army, who were straight garbage. Medusa's army won the battle, took the three sacred treasures, and locked Palutena in the underworld. While trapped, Palutena magically bestowed a bow and arrow to Pit, a former bodyguard-ish person, and that's about the entire plot. The game itself has Pit traveling through the underworld to save Palutena. Depending on the ending requirements you meet, you can get a few different endings. In the worst ending, Palutena makes you a farmer. Like ouch. Like, you literally went through the Grecian version of hell, rescued your goddess, and she made you a farmer. In the best one, Palutena makes you a bigger version of yourself and gives you a kiss. Which, I mean, look at that 8-bit hottie. Who wouldn't want a kiss from that? The second one's story of myths and monsters is a bit more bland, to be honest. Palutena has a dream that Angel Land will come under the attack of demons. So, Palutena summons Pit and tells him that he must try and use the three sacred treasures in order to repel the demons. The problem is that Pit isn't strong enough to use these treasures yet. So, he must go through the trials of the underworld, the overworld, and skyworld in order to gain the strength and right to wear the gear. And that's about it, honestly. Like, it can be said that this game may not even be canon, so yeah. What's more, Uprising doesn't seem to acknowledge this game in any significant capacity. Speaking of Uprising, this one was a bit thicker with plot. Somehow, we, the player, find that Medusa has been resurrected. She seeks to finish what she started while getting back at Palutena. So, to summarize things, because this one can be a bit beefy in nature, Medusa sends her commanders Hydra, Pandora, and Thanatos to begin her plan. During a battle with Pandora, Pit is cloned with the Mirror of Truth in order to produce Dark Pit, #twinsies. After locating the three sacred treasures and defeating Medusa, yet again, we are treated to the real puppet master in all of this, a la Kingdom Hearts. It appears that Hades is the real big baddie this time. Hades then begins a war amongst the kingdoms of man. This war causes a fight between the goddess Verity, Hades, and Palutena's armies. This fight in particular causes, get this, aliens known as the Aurum to attack Earth. The fighting teams decide, hey, let's not let these guys destroy the place we're fighting over, so they defeat the Aurum and they get sent back into space. Later on, Pit is fighting Hades with the aid of Dark Pit, and in the battle the sacred treasures are destroyed, and Hades eats Pit. Like eats him. After escaping, Pit travels to Dintos, a god of forging. Dintos then makes Pit a new sacred treasure. In order to be deemed worthy of the weapon, Pit has to do even more tasks. Which, I mean, may be a reference to of myths and monsters, but that's a stretch. What's more, why do they have time for this? Hades is clearly still doing terrible things. Why is there time for these trials? But whatever. Pit and Hades get into a new fight. Pit uses the new weapon to defeat Hades because protagonism, and that's about it. But not eternally, see, because Hades vows to come back in another 25 years. And that may be relevant because I don't know that we will get a new Kid Icarus game for 25 years. And that's Pit. I'm not gonna lie, this was a bit of a personal favorite of mine. Ever since Super Smash Bros. Brawl, I've been obsessed with this character. After maining him within the game, I then bought Kid Icarus for the NES, but for the Wii, you know what I mean. And I hated it. I genuinely thought it was a bit unfair. I mean, the game itself remains a classic, it's fine. I played a little bit of Myths and Monsters, and that was a huge improvement. See, Pit isn't one of Nintendo's popular characters. I don't think he's ever going to be. He's not even in what I would call, like the D Squad. But I do think he remains a wonderful piece of Nintendo's past, a character whose game tried to encompass bits of the more popular franchises. We had the weapon improvements of Metroid, the importance of platforming from Mario, and the sense of world from Legend of Zelda. Shoot, this character has so much room for lore expansion, and I think it should be done. It's one of the few Nintendo franchises with lore like this, and I think it's time that they're treated properly.